Hello everyone and welcome to today's lesson. The chord of the day today is 7/6. Let's go ahead and get started. Chord 7/6, we label it with the Roman numeral 7. Notice that we are not using capital letters to label chord 7/6. We are not using capital letters because this chord is not a major chord. So we are using small v, small I, and small I. Chord 7/6 is in the first inversion. So we are putting an Arabic 6 next to the Roman numeral. And there is another element that we are going to put in between the Roman numeral and the Arabic 6. And that is a very small circle. And what that circle indicates is that chord 7/6 is a diminished chord. A diminished chord, as you might remember from our past lessons on the triads, a diminished chord is when it is made of a third and a diminished fifth instead of a perfect fifth. And this is exactly the case with chord 7/6. So what is the function of this chord? What does it do? What is it good for? And when can I use it? Chord 7/6 is perfect for expanding the tonic. In the last lesson, you learned how to expand the tonic from the tonic in the root position to the tonic in the first inversion, from 1 to 1/6. Now, what you can do with chord 7/6 is you can expand these harmonies even further. So you can insert 7/6 in between chord 1 and chord 6. And in this way, you are making this chord 7/6 function like a passing chord. It's going to pass from the tonic in the root position onto the tonic in the first inversion, like in the following example. Notice that it's not like every single chord in this example is equally important. In the first measure, it's chord 1 and chord 1/6 that are the important chords. And the chord in between, 7/6, is just a passing chord. It is passing in between the important chords of tonic in the root position and the tonic in the first inversion. You might ask yourself, how do I know whether a given situation is good for using this chord? Well, take a look at your bass line. If your bass line moves stepwise upwards, if it moves from the first through the second up to the third degree of the scale, you can know that this is a very good situation for harmonizing these three bass lines as chord 1, 7/6, and 1/6. And what if the bass line is not given? Well, there are some soprano lines that work like patterns, and whenever you see these soprano lines, you can be sure that they go very well with this harmonization of 1, 7/6, and 1/6. Take a look at this example, which shows you what bass line and what soprano lines like to be harmonized in this way. Feel free to pause the video and study the examples. Another situation that asks for chord 7/6 is when you have a bass line that moves in steps, but it does not go upwards. If your bass moves from the first to the second degree of the scale and then goes back to the first degree of the scale. This is when you can also harmonize it using the tonic, then chord 7/6, and then again the tonic. So we're going to go from 1, then 7/6, and then 1 again. Take a look at the following examples of the bass lines and the soprano lines that like to be harmonized in this way with these 3 chords, 1, 7/6, and 1. Now, there is an important thing about chord 7/6. This chord contains a tritone. And what is a tritone? A tritone is a highly dissonant interval. There are 2 kinds of tritones, an augmented fourth and a diminished fifth. And these intervals are very dissonant, which means that they are asking for being resolved. So whenever you have a tritone, after the tritone has to come a resolution that will resolve the tension created by the dissonant tritone. Which means that we have to make sure that we know how to lead the voices whenever we see a tritone in a chord. And there are some rules to how to resolve an augmented fourth and to how to resolve a diminished fifth. When you have an augmented fourth, you can resolve it in any way you want as long as each voice of the tritone moves stepwise. Take a look at the following example to see how to resolve a tritone. And remember that you can move your voices in whatever way you like, but you have to move them by steps. Feel free to pause the video in order to take some time to study how to resolve an augmented fourth. And now the diminished fifth. The diminished fifth has to resolve into a third. It has to collapse into a third by contrary motion. Take a look at the following example of how to resolve a diminished fifth. So when you have chord 7/6, the important thing that you have to do is you have to know where the tritone is located, between which voices the tritone is located. Then you have to know whether it is an augmented fourth or a diminished fifth, and then you have to follow the rules that govern the resolution of an augmented fourth and a diminished fifth. But there is a small detail to the resolution of the diminished fifth. You see, Bach, very often when he wrote his own chorales, he would resolve the diminished fifth in an unusual way. So he wouldn't collapse it into the third, which is the correct way of resolving the diminished fifth. He would resolve the diminished fifth by going on to a fifth, a perfect fifth. But he did so only when his bass line moved upwards in steps. So what kind of a lesson is it for us? Where we can learn from Bach that if we have this progression of chords, 1, 7/6, and 1/6, which means that our bass line is moving in steps upwards from the first through the second to the third degree of the scale. And if we have chord 7/6 as that middle chord, and we have a diminished fifth within that chord, we do not have to resolve that diminished fifth into a third. We can resolve it in any way we want as long as we are moving in steps. So take a look at the following example which shows you how to resolve 7/6 onto 1/6 and how to resolve this diminished fifth in a correct way. This is it for today's lesson on chord 7/6. Remember to move on to the next parts of the lesson where you will be able to use 7/6 in practice and to see how it works.